Hey everybody, it's Don. I'm here at one of my favorite places for big trees in western Ohio, Davey Woods State Nature Preserve. And I'm here this year looking for signs of spring, so let's go. One sign of spring I'm seeing immediately is that some trees are starting to break bud and leaf out, including some of our earliest trees in this area that will do that, and that includes our state tree, Ohio buckeye. So here we go. Here's an Ohio buckeye leafing out. Okay, they have a very reddish coloration to their leaf when they're young like this. And first of all, Ohio buckeye has compound leaves that are palmately compound. So they have 5 leaflets arranged like a hand. And so among the various ways that a tree or a plant could have compound leaves, this one has palmately compound leaves. But notice how reddish, again, the leaves are at this stage. Obviously, as they grow and expand, they will green up and start to photosynthesize fully. But at this point, they're quite red, rich with pigments. And it's thought, that's debated about why young leaves are red. But one idea is that this heavy pigmentation at this stage basically protects them as they're expanding. Before their photosynthetic machinery is completely mature, it protects them from photooxidative damage, from too much light essentially before they're ready for it. So that red pigmentation that is made up of phenolic based pigments may protect the leaves in this young, tender state. My quick view of the area so far suggests that there's not a lot moving yet in terms of flowering herbaceous plants, but there is one plant that is starting to flower right now, and it's appropriately named for this time of year. It's called Harbinger of Spring, Erigenia bulbosa. So let's take a look at this little diminutive plant and take a look at its stage of flowering. So this small cluster of flowers that you see right there, I don't know how well that shows, is the flower head, essentially, of Erigenia bulbosa, Harbinger of Spring. A very small diminutive plant, but one of the first plants to flower in the spring, thus its name. So I see that so far. I'll try to find other flowering herbaceous plants if they exist. But while I'm in this little spot, I want to point out a cool tree over here that isn't necessarily a sign of spring, but it's just kind of an oddball tree that I've seen before. And this is this beech tree. This is an American beech, and this tree is, American beech in general is known as a smooth barked tree, right? And it's the tree that everybody likes to carve their initials in. But it can exhibit bark anomalies like this, these little knobs. Sometimes they're in diamond-shaped patterns, or sometimes beech can be rippled. We call those rippled beeches. So they can have a variety of anomalous bark configurations. And this is just a tree that I've seen here before I wanted to point out to you that displays some of that variation you can see in American beech. There's another tree in this preserve that displays some different kinds of variation I'll try to find and point out to you as well. But this is one just off the Conrad Trail here at Davey Woods. In this spot, there's another shrub starting to flower, and this is spice bush, Lindera benzoin. So it forms these fairly inconspicuous yellow flowers in the spring. It's quite early. I see a handful in this vicinity that are starting to flower, although most aren't. But nonetheless, they're beginning their yearly cycle. All right, spice bush. And I saw an herbaceous plant out over here pushing out of the ground, at least. Not flowering yet. But this is kind of a special plant too. And that's this plant right here. Okay. This is ramps. Ramps are an edible plant, okay? You can dig them up. They have a bulb, an onion-like bulb. And they're really easy to prepare. You basically just saute them in some butter or some olive oil, and they're delicious. Ramps are delicious, okay? You more or less can caramelize them. And there are whole festivals about ramps in parts of Ohio. So this is ramps, and if I break that and smell it, basically it smells like onions. A mild onion. So they're delicious. I've had them. This is a state nature preserve, kind of place where you would not be permitted to harvest these. But if you have an area where you can, private property or get permission, I'd try them out. They're delicious. I did an episode here about 1.5 years ago. It was among the first 3 locations I think I visited when I started this series. But I hadn't been back since. But every time you come to Davey Woods, you have to admire the big trees, including tulip poplars that you can find here, tulip trees. And these several occur right along the trail, and it's easy to admire. Some are a little bit off the trail, but easy enough to see. And again, before the leaves come out, like now, it's very easy to see these things and admire their trunks and canopies. So here's a grand tree right next to the trail. I've measured these trees. I'm not going to do it today on camera, but these tulip trees that we'll see today, or that you will see if you visit Davey Woods, top out at about 43, 48 inches in diameter. There is one particularly big tulip tree that I will stop at. I think it's 53 inches in diameter. I will get a measurement of that one, but this is something you'll see when you come to Davey Woods, and I pointed out quite a bit the last time I was here. But you know, it's one of the reasons you come here. So look at this monster. Now, tulip trees, as I probably talked about in that video, grow pretty fast. So these are really large trees, approaching 4 feet in diameter, 3.5 to 4 feet. They may only be 120, 130 years old or so, because these trees grow pretty fast. If that was a white oak of that size, it would be much older, typically. All right. So this is just a little curve. It's up near the top of the preserve itself, near a road, and there's some construction going on a property. It's some distance away. I don't know what they're doing, but here's a pair of giants over here. All right, so you can't help but admire these trees. As I've displayed numerous times in this series, I'm a compulsive tree ring counter when I have the opportunity. I like to try to identify the tree species, its size, and its age if I can. And through years of doing that, you develop a knowledge of how fast trees grow and what you might expect. So here's one. Here's a tree that's down. This is a white ash. Okay, this one succumbed to emerald ash borer in this area. And it was cut apart because it crossed the trail. This fell probably several years ago now, but you can still count the rings on it. So this is a large white ash. I actually didn't get a measurement on it yet, but it looks to be about 2.5 feet in diameter, maybe just over 2 feet in diameter. And as you can see, these rings, are still apparent, still countable. So I counted the rings on this particular slice, and this tree is almost exactly 100 years old at this point. Right now, this is a cut some distance up from the base, right? This tree, there's about a 25-foot long log here. At the base, it'll be a few years older than what I'm counting right here. So this tree has probably started growing, it grew for about 110 years is what I would guess. All right, so there's a white ash, give you an idea, about 2 to 2.5 feet in diameter. They grow fairly fast. They used to grow fairly fast, excuse me. They're practically non-existent now. And there's a tree of 110 years on the ground now. And just interesting. Now, this may all sound like minutia or, hobby stuff, but I actually had the opportunity to consult on a tree theft case recently, where a tree was cut down in a nature preserve and a log from that tree was sold. The folks tried to sell more than one log, but could only get one log out of the woods. And it's because of this thing I do here, right? Developing a knowledge of trees and estimating ages or counting their age, just like what I did here. I was asked to consult about the size and age and health of this tree. This happened to be a white oak tree, and it was about 115 years old. little short of 3 feet in diameter, about 2 feet 10 inches in diameter, and which means it grew pretty fast for a white oak. White oaks grow fairly slowly, but it was a very valuable tree. It was in good health, and it was cut down, a log sold, and the people are now being prosecuted, right? And there's information now about the value, age, size, health, and value of that tree in the documentation to support the case. So this thing I do here isn't just for fun. It's useful. You know, you never know when it might become important, this kind of knowledge. Plus you can win bar trivia once in a while. So let's keep going. There's something going on with this tree behind me that I know I've talked about before, but it's been a while, so let me talk about it again. So if you look at the bark texture of this tree behind me, you can see how variable it looks. Okay, this is another tulip tree, big one. And the bark up here is the kind of bark you'd expect to see generally on a tulip tree. Furrowed fairly deeply, very clearly. Then we get down here into this part of the stem and it's much smoother. Okay, there's furrows. The outer bark looks like it's been worn off or rubbed off. This is actually a fungal disease. It's called smooth patch. And it's caused by a fungus that feeds on the outer bark tissues of the tree. It's supposedly not pathogenic to the tree itself, so it doesn't supposedly harm the tree, the health of the tree, because it's really only feeding on outer bark tissues that are not that essential for the health of the tree. But it creates these smooth patches on trees that might have much normally, more ridged bark or furrowed bark, and it makes it really obvious to see. This can also be found on lots of different species. Formerly, you could see this a lot on ash trees. You see it on tulip trees. You can see it on oak trees. It's a generalist fungus, meaning it will, infect or infest a lot of different trees. Again, supposedly does not impact the health of the tree. I have a few questions about that, but that's what the studies seem to show so far. I'm now in the bottomland near where the stream that flows through Davey Woods runs, and in what we would call the riparian area. And here I'm seeing some movement of some spring wildflowers. Here, of course, we have the harbinger of spring. But next to it, we have the leaves of trout lily starting to show. So I haven't seen any in flower yet, but their leaves are pushing out of the litter and starting to grow. And so you see that kind of mottled greenish purple leaf. Those will expand further. And there are 2 varieties of trout lilies we have in Ohio. One's white flowered, one's yellow flowered. So these are nice little, you very often find them in a riparian zone. They like moist soils in particular. Okay, but not a whole lot beyond the few things I've shown you so far in the herbaceous realm. So I think we're gonna stick to trees quite a bit today. I should point out that we've had a pretty cold spring. We had a pretty cold winter, for us here in Western Ohio, and a slow start to spring. Now today, it's gonna be about 60 or so, and then it will be in the 70s over the next couple days. So I'd expect this weekend for things to really just burst, okay, and start to go crazy. So we're really at the cusp of the major spring flowering season for this part of Ohio. All right, so let's continue up the trail. I'm going to show you a couple of big and cool trees up in this direction. When you do this stuff long enough, you get very attuned to what the average tree or individual of a particular species looks like, right? That's one of the ways you identify things. You just learn a gestalt about what the thing is supposed to look like and pattern match that with memories in your brain. Of course, you can now do this electronically as well and verify it in all kinds of ways, which is great. But, as I've talked about many times in this series, even today, here's your average beech tree. Okay, your average beech tree is a very smooth barked tree. I'm kind of on the dark side here of it. Let me see if I can get a better angle. I guess this is completely in the shade, but it is a smooth barked tree, right? That's why everybody carves their names in it. And as I pointed out earlier, sometimes they can be knobby, seen that in many places. And sometimes they can look like this. This tree right here is an American beech. Look at that bark. As far as I can tell, this tree is completely healthy. I mean, it's not perfect. There in the upper parts of the tree above, say 20 feet or 25 feet, it gets smooth again. But down here, it has the texture of more like, say, a black cherry almost. So this individual, which I've seen before, really indicates some of the weird variations you can see in a species that's normally about the smoothest barked tree you can find. Okay, that's a healthy American beech showing potato chip bark. Okay, so I think that's pretty cool. While I'm in the land of giants here with this huge red oak behind me, I do want to emphasize the king and the queen of Davey woods. This tulip tree in front of us, which I remeasured, but I was correct. It's 53 inches in diameter at breast height. It is probably about 150 feet tall, would be my guess, somewhere in that range. And it is again, the king and queen of this preserve. I say that because the flowers of tulip tree have both sexes represented, male and female. They are perfect flowers in that regard, and they are ancient flowers too. Okay, the magnolias with which this tree is related have some of the most primitive flowers we know about among flowering plants. So this is a big one. And to my knowledge, it's the biggest tulip tree in Davey woods, and I think also the biggest tree in Davey woods. So I always like to revisit it. It's a beautiful forest-grown tree with a long, straight bole with a pretty branched crown. Looks perfectly healthy at this point. Again, given that they do grow fast, it's probably a 150-year-old tree or so at that size. Now, this is big, right? But just recently, and I think back in January, I measured a tulip tree in Lakeview Cemetery outside of Cleveland that was 70 inches in DBH. So this is big. That one was giant. That was the biggest tulip tree I had ever measured. But nonetheless, I like to visit this tree when I'm here, as it is the ruler of the woods amongst other giants. Okay, in my distance, I see giant sugar maples, giant beech trees. This is a red oak I started nearby, and there are giant white oaks in these woods. So get here if you like big trees and old growth forests. Well, I came to Davey woods looking for signs of spring, and it's pretty clear that spring's not totally here yet. We need a few more days. I think this weekend will really change the picture of things in the woods. But we still saw plenty of highlights, which is always the case when you visit Davey woods. So with that, I'm going to sign off for this week, and I'll see you next time. This is The Naturalist. Bye-bye.